All right, well, let's move over to our next panel. This is looking at how AI and sustainable uses of AI can be integrated into resettlement. And we have some incredible panelists and experts in this field. And I'll let Milad introduce Amy.
Yeah, and this panel will be facilitated by Amy. Amy Sample Ward is the Chief Executive Officer of NTen, a nonprofit that empowers organizations to use technology skillfully and ensure access for everyone. Amy's work focuses on creating welcoming and compassionate community engagement opportunities. Amy's leadership at NTen supports nonprofits in leveraging technology to build capacity and resilience, aligning with efforts to help refugees achieve self-sufficiency through digital means.
And now I begin. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. We have some topics to cover. Thank you for the intro. Now I'm going to explain what NTen is. So we're a nonprofit organization that was formed by over 500 community members who knew that technology could support social change, but wasn't necessarily being designed to do that. 25 years ago. Remember that time? And that community is well over 500 people today from 135 countries around the world. We invite all of you to be a part of that community, really like rising tide lifts all ships mentality, a space where we can figure out how to use tools and make decisions around them with everyone and our missions and communities in mind. And one program that NTen has, and then I will go to your intros, is the Digital Inclusion Fellowship. Free to participate in. We cover all expenses and support organizations who are already trusted by and working with communities most impacted by digital divides to build community responsive programs around digital literacy within the community that are sustained within their mission. So they're not standalone organizations or standalone programs, but integrated into the way they do their work so that more people can be part of having these conversations and crafting the digital world. And applications for the next cohort are open right now on the NTen website. There'll be 22 folks chosen across the US. So if you want to, or you have a colleague, or you know somebody who's working in an organization, be a fellow. We would love to support you building those programs. Okay, enough about me. Who are all y'all?
My name is Rachel Kimber. I have worked in this sector, which I call the social sector, for about 20 years now, predominantly in philanthropy. So I see how it works from the seat that I was given. And that means now I get to be a consultant to the sector, helping folks understand people, process, and tools, right? So the tool is kind of the focus for today, but we understand that the people are how anything is going to move. And so I have a background in cognitive science. That means that I didn't go for computer science. It wasn't all about the machine. I didn't go for psych. It wasn't all about the human. It was about the combination of those and how do they fit together? How do they work together? And what can artificial intelligence do for us, right? So that was a question I was grappling with 20 years ago. Now I get to bring it to this sector, to the folks that I've worked with for the past 20 years and aspiring to be a futurist for you all, right? To see the trends that are happening and to start thinking about where are we going and how can we get there together efficiently, effectively, and centering relationship. So my consultancy is called Full Circle Impact Solutions, right? Close that feedback loop. And I'm an accidental techie, right? For lack of a better way to describe myself. And I hope that many of you will leave here today saying that you are AI experts, because the fact that you are part of these conversations and in these spaces means that you know quite a bit more than probably your colleagues that are still sitting in that fear reaction state. So thank you all for joining today. Hopefully we can bring some more clarity as we chat.
Oh my
Nate,
God.
we haven't heard from you today. Who
I'm
might you
fangirl.
be?
I'm Nate. Great to be with you.
No.
No, really.
Just talk about like coming to this conversation, maybe.
Sure. Well, so I was born in Munich, Germany, and raised in the States in the Lake Tahoe area. My husband immigrated here to the U.S., and so on a personal level, I just have found myself in a lifetime of looking at the nature of what it means to cross borders. And not just countries' borders, but cultural borders, and even in these conversations, technical ones. So it's an honor to be in your presence.
Awesome. Kim?
Okay. Hi, my name is Kimberly Inez Mays, and for those who don't know me, I am the senior. What am I again? I am the Senior Program Officer for Digital Communications on Switchboard. But outside of this, I am an avid puzzle solver. I am a lifelong nerd and accidental speaker. And I am just obsessed with AI, but I know that it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. And because I've been in technology all my life, my mission is to really democratize technology and make everyone feel like they're an expert, make everyone feel empowered. And I just love to do so through teaching and speaking.
Awesome. Mala?
I'm Mala. End of story.
No. There's a long story.
Yeah, there's a long story. Yeah, I'm Mala. I recently joined an algorithmic auditing organization called Humane Intelligence as its head of impact. I spent most of my career actually with the United Nations in different specialized agencies working throughout sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Europe, and then here in New York before I went over to GitHub, where I was the director of tech for social good. So started a bunch of stuff with the UN as well there, worked on a lot of COVID-related things, which is where I met Amy, and we've been collaborating ever since on all kinds of open source work. For the past 2 years or so, I've been on the AI side of things, I guess. Really with the evaluation space, which I'll talk about a lot, obviously, given the organization I'm from. But I actually find a lot of the value in the evaluation of AI systems because we are probably not going to build frontier models, which we can talk about in a minute. So I think for a lot of the work that IRC does, really it comes down to how you evaluate the tool, what guardrails you put up, and how exactly it's deployed.
Awesome. I want to start where I think we should always start, which is community. Community-centered design, we didn't use that term, but I will use that term. And how do we have folks most impacted included from the beginning and centered in our design processes? Obviously not how most AI products currently available today have been made or planning to continue being made. So there's two parts to that. There's the digital literacy training education that enables folks to enter those kinds of conversations, but then also some level of user design for them and trust to want to enter into that. And I'm curious if you all have examples, happy for bad ones, would love it if you could find a good one. Examples or just principles for folks who've maybe never participated in a process like that, really to think about what it is, because it isn't just like putting up a sign on the door and magically like 15 people come and give you free advice from the community, right? That is no, I mean, good luck to you if that is your plan, but no one will come. So what does it really, really look like, especially with these tools that on a consumer side feel like they're changing every day and people don't maybe know how to even approach a conversation with an organization about them? Go for it.
Again, I'm happy to jump in. I think I'm sitting next to Amy because my topic answers will generally be really high level, right? I talk a lot about ethics and strategy, and we will get probably more tactical as we move down the line. So happy to keep kicking things off. But for me, this conversation right now is about self-sufficiency. How do you leave here as an expert today? The way you do that is by trusting your internal compass. When you engage with AI, it starts with your values. Right? There's no definition out there. What is transparency? What is accountability? What is a trustworthy tool? It starts with you knowing that something isn't right here. Like this tool doesn't seem to be doing what I need it to do. I sense that something isn't okay here. Or one of the examples I like to bring, we'll get a little tactical here, is if you have your internal policy, right? Internal policy, you've decided it's okay to use transcription services, but you haven't thought through what does it look like to sit down and hit the record button with the stakeholder on the other side, right? And so that's where the AI tool isn't taking away those conversations and questions. It's adding layers of complexity, but you already know what it looks like to be transparent and to ask for permission and ask for consent. So those same values that you use to build your CRM, those same values that brought you to the nonprofit sector, those are the same guideposts that are going to help you as you experiment and play. And so I'll leave it there so you guys can get a little bit more tactical with it, but those are going to be the ways that is this okay? Can I go forward with this, or should I pause and maybe find someone to talk to and figure out what's going on here?
Mala.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk tactics because AI is about tactics. Mm-hmm. And I emphasize this on every panel I've done about AI. There is like a new era of technology we're talking about. When you talk about software, often you're building software to create an output, and you can containerize that output and evaluate that in silico, right?
Yeah.
That's a bunch of buzzwords to basically say you control what you're putting in and what you get out in software. AI is not that, and I think that's a fundamental difference that people really need to understand. So again, tactically speaking, if you look at a basic systems architecture for AI, you've got your frontier model, then you've got a fine-tuned model, then you can bring in something called a RAG system, your retrieval augmentation, basically like a database of documents. And then maybe you put an API on top of that, and then at the top, you've got what the user actually interacts with. So that's basically what ChatGPT is, and that's why it's so popular, because before, if you wanted to manipulate any kind of LLM, large language model, you'd have to know the Python behind it, and most people don't do that. So what OpenAI did was they put a user interface on there, and we talked about this a lot with open source because that was an analogous example, is putting that graphical user interface automatically makes it accessible to people. Anybody in this room can prompt something on ChatGPT. That's why it's popular. The problem is ChatGPT, as you use it on your phone or your computer or whatever, is a cloud-based service, and everything you put into ChatGPT goes back into their models. And so when you talk about community building, we can't do it the same way we did with software. We just can't, right? We could build something that was in our architecture, in our cloud instance. We could control what went in and out for community building. But with AI, if you're using a subscription-based service, you just can't do that. You have to assume anything you put in there will be used later. That's why you can't put PII. That's why you can't put location services. You can't put anything that's proprietary to your organization in there without a clear policy to state what can go in and what can't. So that's the first part about community building. That's really important to understand in these what AI people call high-stakes situations, which all of you work on that. The second thing to understand is, again, on the evaluation side of things, tactically, there's a lot of things that you can do with community building, and one of them is just simply the adjudication process that comes out of the outputs. So let's say you want to build a benchmark, and you have 100 prompts that you put into your system, whether it's ChatGPT or some other combination of models, or maybe you build something on your own. Then you get a bunch of responses. One of the easiest ways to do community building is to get people in the community to annotate those responses. Is it safe? Is it unsafe? Is it risky? Is it appropriate? Is it factually accurate? There are all kinds of things that you can evaluate. And that's a really simple way to bring in the community, evaluate what you're building, but then also not violate their norms or their rights by putting in their proprietary information into the system. So again, we have to think about these things in more creative ways than we did with software, honestly, because everything is fair game with AI.
Kim?
Yeah, and I take this approach too of just making sure people are comfortable with technology because it can be very intimidating, very overwhelming. And part of what my personal philosophy is to leave no one behind. So I'm not one of those types of people that need to sound smart when I'm teaching people. I want people to get aha moments when they listen to me and hear me speak. And I think one of the ways to really build community is by getting people comfortable. So when I teach AI or when I show people how to do something with AI, I usually start with a low stakes situation like building a recipe or even just writing a poem or a song or a story to get people really comfortable with the technology. And also part of that community building is to also teach how things work in a way that's not scary, to say, okay, well, this is going to take your data and it's going to train on it. Don't put anything in here that you don't want used later. Things like that, because I also worked in a big database marketing company, and I know the data that these companies have on pretty much all of us. Anytime you use your smartphone, carry things around, make a purchase, all of that is being stored, logged, and cataloged so that you see an ad and that's not a coincidence. So I know how things work on the back end, and that can be terrifying for somebody who does not know this. So part of the way to build community is to be really transparent and say, okay, well, this is how it works exactly on the back end, and this is how you can use it safely.
Do you want to add anything? Okay.
Sure, just that there is this trend in AI use to share more personal information than you would even with a best friend. It's this strange...
User research, user design.
Yes.
It's designed that way.
It is. It's designed to create this blind trust. And so if there are questions that people have and they will ask AI before they ask their spouse, they'll ask AI before they ask their best friend or their parent or their teacher, then all of a sudden we have a really big social problem where all of a sudden we might find newcomers using this technology in ways that sharing their traumas and their stories in ways that may have unintended consequences. So like you mentioned, the memory that any of these models have is immense. It can really document your stories. One of the most vulnerable part of the asylum process is capturing people's stories and then validate them and then justifying why they need resettlement, right? This is already, we're talking about their most difficult moments in life. And yet those same populations might have the same trend of the general population to then share with AI even more personal information. So when we talk about AI literacy, how can we help various communities understand what they might be giving up when telling their stories? Vulnerability is a beautiful human trait, but if exploited, it can be used for nefarious ends.
Can informed consent exist? Could you ever reach informed consent on a tool that maybe someone is learning about for the first time in the third or fourth language removed from primary language, in a tool that maybe the staff person doesn't even know how it works, right? From a full stack perspective, data privacy perspective, et cetera. But in an organization that maybe doesn't have data consent practices that are all that great to begin with, and then you're feeding it in a situation where you're saying, this is basically your ticket to services. So obviously the way I asked the question maybe belies my opinion, but I will open it up for examination by the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in the field for 15 years now. I was, all kinds of initiatives with the World Food Program, with UNICEF, all kinds of data uses. The idea of informed consent was always very difficult because I'm sure, as this group knows, what it is changes situation to situation. You could have somebody who's under duress who can't consent to anything, not to speak of how their data is used. And then, if they're in a more stable situation, they can have a fully informed view of what that looks like. I think it's a tough question, but I think honestly, and this has come up in a number of conversations at Humane Intelligence, the idea of algorithmic autonomy. We don't live in that world anymore. No. So I think we also have to be realistic in the world that we live in, even here in the States. If you interact with any kind of digital technology, there is some data about you somewhere. And yes, technically you probably consented to that in the terms and conditions, but did you read it? No, you didn't read it. So we're already not living in a world where we have full autonomy over our digital identity. And so that's not to say that we should make those same mistakes in the field, because those consequences can be much dire for vulnerable populations, especially who are migrating. But at the same time, we can't put ourselves in this idealistic state where we never engage with the technology, we never try anything, we never do any kind of exploration whatsoever, because then I've seen this with the UN for decades. 15 years later, we are woefully ill-informed in what it looks like, and maybe we get an executive director who really cares about this, and then everybody's scrambling to implement it, and they do a shit job. They do a terrible job. So I do think there is a balance to be had between reality and the idealistic state. And this is something that we've continually contended with at the UN, because sometimes we just needed them to consent for us to do this thing, because it would be just so much more efficient and safer in the long run. But then to sit down and explain to a farmer, a subsistence farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, how their data might be used, conceptually, like, what? And then it would also take a lot of time, but that doesn't negate the fact that there are ethics behind what we do, and we need to approach it in a moral, standardized way. Like, every single time there's a new large language model, they have to rebuild it. The reproducibility issue in machine learning is very difficult. So that literal model that you're using could actually change what your informed consent looks like. And I'm not a technical enough person. I think I have a very good technical competency, but I'm not, that advanced data scientist who can sit there and tell you, like, practically, this is what changes between version 4.1 and 4.2. I don't know. So there is some balance between the conversations we need to have, and again, not going off into the idealistic world where we never do anything, but then also being woefully unaware of, like, the ethics and morals behind what we're trying.
And I think to that point, it goes down to basic explainability. If you can't explain what the tool is doing and where the data is going at a level that, again, a layperson can understand, then that's probably not the tool to be starting with. And so I think going back to the commonality of the large language model right now, there's a lot of great use cases for it, right? There's a lot of places that you can make sure that that large language model is working for you. But I think if you leave with anything today is a really clear understanding of what should not be going into that tool and making sure you're communicating that to your staff. There is some pretty heavy risk, and we're not the first to encounter it. I'll share a quick little example from Samsung, 2023. Samsung had these, ready to go engineers who took proprietary data, right? For profit, this is what we make money on, and stuck it in a large language model. Samsung had to shut down ChatGPT until they upskilled their staff and explained that's not okay, because now our money-making machine is in some large language model that anyone could potentially access, right? So when we're talking about proprietary on the for-profit side, really easy to get it, right? Proprietary things that they're building and developing for the world. Your proprietary is the personally identifying information. Your grantee, I work in philanthropy, so it's usually grantee names, right? But your direct service folks, like making sure that you're keeping that safe. And so one of the ways you go about establishing that is by building a really robust risk mitigation plan, framework, right? Things will go sideways, right? That doesn't mean you don't experiment. That doesn't mean you don't touch it. It means that you have really good plans in place for what's inbounds and what's out of bounds, and who's the responsible person if something goes sideways, right? With this pile of data, you run that CRM, you're responsible for it. So make sure that your staff understand what can and cannot be used in large language models. And I think to Mala's point, like really being careful about what goes into the large language models and getting serious about thinking about in-house development. And I know, again, like the futurist here, like I'm pointing to a direction that seems really far down the road, but these tools are not that expensive and they will keep you safer, right? So that safety security piece is something to really, make sure you sit with. Don't let it scare you away from using the tools at all. But that's a really important piece to be thinking about as you take a step. And even Samsung messed up. So
Yeah.
we will.
I'll just add 2 quick points. I think one thing in informed consent, especially if you're working with the same populations like over time, is to explain the difference of what's going on, because one of the most honestly manipulative parts about ChatGPT is that the interface looks very similar to chatbots we've all used before, but the underlying technology is fundamentally different. And I think a lot of people just cannot wrap their heads around that, even here in the States. So part of the informed consent is really just telling you, like, this is WhatsApp with your friend, and this is ChatGPT with one of the most powerful large language models in the world underneath it. Like, that's a big difference. That's a big part of informed consent. And then the other thing I'll just say is, again, a lot of it does come down to the way it's implemented and deployed, your system architecture. Like, we can talk about this in a minute, but the difference between a cloud-based service and on-prem is fundamentally different here, too, because on-prem could actually be something that is containerized within your organization, so your data is not going back out to these frontier model companies for them to reabsorb into their next model. Mm-hmm. So you also need to, everybody needs to upskill on the technical side.
Did you hear that? Reabsorb into their next model. That was really important. Like, that's why you don't want to let those large language models train on your data. And so this is one of the trade-offs.
Right, but that's why you also have to know how it's actually implemented,
Yes.
because you could use the same frontier model in a way that it's not, like you don't have data going back to the frontier model company. You could also be using it in a way that it does. And so understanding that yourself before you go out and try to get somebody informed consent, like that, if they ask you that, you won't be able to answer the question, how's my data used? Well, I don't know. On-prem or cloud, those are pretty big questions in this case, so you have to know the difference.
We are talking about some very specific tools, right? These are like massive, currently earth-destroying tools. And what does it mean then to build on top of them, to build with them, even if you are such a great ice skater that you like, now I have to come up with a triple axel? Is that an ice skating? Okay, there's people are nodding.
Why would you use an ice skating?
I started the analogy, so I have to follow it through, right? Triple. No. I am from Portland, though, represent. So, but my point is, you find a thin as an ice skate. Okay, I'm gonna let it go. Find your path through. Right, where it is quote unquote safe, or it has met a threshold of safety for your team to use, it is still built off of one of these mega tools. What are our obligations? What are our principles to try to operate within that, and what does it really mean to be an organization supporting the 123 most vulnerable people in the world in those tools?
Evaluations. I mean, no, that is like, of all the parts in AI that I could have gone into, I chose evaluations. I was brought into it and I chose it because I really think that's where it is. Like, there are maybe 5 companies, as you alluded to, that are building these frontier models. And to be fair, they do care about feedback. Like, when people give them feedback, this is racist, this is sexist, this is against whatever population, I think the frontier model companies actually do a decent job absorbing that feedback. We have good relationships with frontier model companies for that reason. The problem is you're talking about, huge, massive sets of data, the way they get the data.
The open web.
Whether they scrape it, whether they crawl it, those things matter too. And then how they're using it, whether they actually got informed consent to use all of that. All of those questions are big ethical questions. But apart from that, there's only so many ways that we can directly feed back into what they build. And then again, every large language model is essentially rebuilt. And so there's no retroactive, my feedback somehow made this model from 2 years ago better. So it comes down to us evaluating what we've tried. And so if we put in the frontier model, then the fine tune, and then all the other stuff, we have to evaluate at each level to make sure we're getting something that is factually accurate, that is not racist or sexist, that is not against a certain population, that does not absorb PII. Those are the things that we need to check for. And it takes a lot, but we are in the era where we are now committing to training the machine versus training humans, because we, maybe some of us, I don't know, actually feel like the machine will do a better job at scale to address some of these issues. So that's a trade-off that we have to make. And if the ROI is not there, if it's genuinely better to train the human than the machine, train the humans. Don't put the machine in place just yet. But you have to do the due diligence of evaluation before you can decide.
And one way we can address this issue is by looking at the past and not letting it be our future. So, for instance, what were some of the commonalities, or one particular commonality between these atrocities? So the genocide, of course, in Nazi Germany or in Rwanda, or the mass expulsion in Vietnam or Bhutan, or the forced relocation in USSR or here with Japanese Americans, or forced denationalization in Syria and Myanmar. What was the common denominator between all of them? The governments had ID cards that determined their ethnicity or religious identity, meaning it was the data that this one oppressive group had about the most vulnerable among them that was then weaponized against them. So when we are talking about personal identified information that is in these data sets, when we're talking about people sharing their stories, the zip code as sort of a proxy for race or these types of things, we have to think through how this could be used against the most vulnerable. Right? We have to think through how to anonymize this data, how to set it apart to ensure that there are barriers between sharing it and using it to target people. So I think this is what's at stake here. We cannot go back to these past patterns, or else we will end up becoming what we set out against.
Yeah, and a lot of this also predates AI too. I used to work at several companies where we would put together profiles of people to basically determine what they would purchase next. And I know it sounds scary, but like things can be keyed off of like any sort of piece of data that you can imagine. So, I like to say is if the product is free to use or cheap to use, you are the product. And basically it comes down to people just being really upset that their data is being used to train Meta or X or Grok or whatever, but it's data that has been supplied freely. And as you said, Mala, too, like a lot of people don't read the terms and conditions in terms of use, but it's all laid out there. It's like once you give something away.
Amidst everything that we've already talked about, I wonder if we can talk within that context. Like, what does it actually look like to evaluate? What does it actually look like to say, okay, we're going to build this with some community members giving us feedback? Who are they? Are they already people that went through? Like, practicalities here, if folks can share. Who wants to begin?
I love that you said
Okay.
build this. I'm like, build what?
Right.
And so I think that's a really important starting point, is if you have discovered a pile of dirty laundry, right? And in the philanthropic world, that's reporting, right? Nobody reads the reports. Let's figure out a solution because I know they just sit there, right? So that's the pile of dirty laundry. So in philanthropy, I'm looking at that pile and I'm like, how do we turn this into something useful, right? We don't want it to be for surveillance or control or, nefarious purposes. We are here to do good with that data. Okay, so what do we want to do with it? Who's going to be part of that conversation? And so I think when we talk about building, we need to start with the stakeholders at that conversation. And if you're kicking it off before you've even thought about who the stakeholders are, you need to step it back, right? So back to, what does a good rollout look like? Finding that pile of dirty laundry. We have a problem, we have a point of friction. Hopefully you're starting with the low-hanging fruit, like the human resource manual, right? Start with something easy. Don't go straight to the PII. I had someone ask me in a 101, how do we keep our PII safe as we're learning AI? I'm like, don't start with PI, right? Like, don't start with the personally identifying information. Start with the easy stuff, the HR manual that nobody wants to update. Practice pulling in different pieces of information, right? Here's this new legalese that I have to add into my manual. Have ChatGPT help you do that really simple thing, right? So when you're talking about what to build or where to begin, it's really thinking about what does none of the staff want to have to deal with right now, or what don't we have time, right? So those are the places to drill into. And then how do you begin? Well, for me, it's really functional, right? It's really focused on my own internal efficiency, which I hope we move to collaboration. I hope we move to innovation. But right now, it's about how do I get from A to B a little bit quicker? And that looks like not having the tool right for me, but create some blog series ideas. Create a timeline so that I know, when I need to start. Create a fundraising campaign for this demographic in this state at this time, right? So I'm not putting a lot of information into the tool, but it's going to give me some really useful product. And so that's where, when you're thinking about starting the journey, becoming self-sufficient with this tool, figure out where are those pain points, where's the friction, what can you do that does not even begin to touch PII to start playing, and how do you bring the stakeholders and collaborators around that singular conversation? This is called a pilot.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rachel, about the low stakes. Like, find something that's lower hanging fruit, low risk, and then just making sure that people understand, okay, this is what you put in, this is what you get out, and this is why we got this result. And just that iteration of prompting and that iteration of testing, I think, just to put people at ease too.
So for the last year and a half, I've been serving as an expert AI trainer at OpenAI. And this is a really interesting initiative because they're putting an incredible amount of resources into what they're calling the human data team. The human data team is made up of specialists, or basically nerds, across many disciplines from all around the world. And in my role as a First Amendment expert and human rights expert, I work on training the models that are not yet out. And so we go in and we put in these case studies. We talk with AI about the very conversations we're having. We're building rubrics and things to evaluate its efficacy. Other colleagues from other disciplines that are directly aligned with ours or adjacent to it end up peer reviewing our work and then evaluating AI's work. And if that kind of investment will be made, imagine the efficacy of the models that will come out next. It will help solve those discriminatory issues that we've been seeing and prevent those harms. Imagine if there were expert AI trainers within the refugee settlement system who are the asylum seekers themselves, meaning as a part of their work, they actually get paid to be an expert on their experience and train the AI systems that may affect their communities. So what if a part of seeking refuge, the resettlement process actually gives work to people to ensure that their lived experience is the textbook that is training the very technologies that could potentially harm them. And in training them, it prevents that harm.
So I guess on the question of what, I mean, there are obviously a lot of different AI disciplines, and unfortunately, for better or for worse, when we talk about AI, we almost default always to generative AI, which is why we use acronyms like LLM, which mean nothing in computer vision. So the first thing to do is decide what kind of AI you're actually looking at, and whether it's more of an ML-based technology or if it's like a generative AI, which uses neural nets and large language models. The second thing is, if you're using generative AI, you're probably building a chatbot. I mean, that is the use case, right? That's like 99 out of 100, if not more. It's basically a glorified chatbot. The one thing that I've heard, like, I actually attended a panel a couple months ago, which is nice because I usually speak on them and was actually able to listen to somebody. They were working in healthcare, and they actually made a good argument. I think this is probably analogous for a lot of people here, is that for years in healthcare, it was a bunch of pivot tables, like a bunch of data scientists creating pivot tables and then try to find out what the signal is kind of in a manual way. But now AI has this ability to bring all these complex systems together and tell you a response. Again, the problem is that response correct? We don't know, right? So that's what we got to figure out. And so when you talk about the actual types of evaluations, you've got things like red teaming, which is something that's come from the cybersecurity world. Some of you may have participated in red teaming events for other purposes before. But it's really about probing the model, probing the system with deep subject matter expertise to see if you can get it to say something that's inaccurate or something that's biased or racist or whatever. There's another type of evaluation that's more on the bounty side, where you evaluate the actual system, so you have to know about the system outputs and inputs rather than the deep subject matter expertise. And then there's also benchmarks, which are quite common these days. They can be optimized and gamified essentially, but if you need a snapshot in time of performance, then it's it's a relatively straightforward and quick way to actually evaluate your system. What Humane Intelligence has done for the past couple of years is really this idea of bespoke evaluations, where you need something that goes beyond just like one of these kind of set methods of evaluating your tool. If you want to talk about these really high stakes situations where you're in this ideal state of, I've got 1,000 spreadsheets and I need to take all of this information on this person and make a decision quickly about the fate of their life, and I want AI to do that, we can help you come up with a way to actually evaluate that in like a reproducible, methodologically sound, and documented way. And that is really difficult, but that's one of the many things we're working on. The other thing that we're also working on is a new platform build, and one of the issues that we have is, of course, the way that labor has been exploited in AI, a lot of it in low and middle income countries. And so if somebody were to train a model with their expertise, for example, how can we monetize that in a way so that it's not a one-off thing? Because it took you 14 years to go to medical school. Right. We don't want your output one time, and then that's it, and then we put it in the machine, and we never need to talk to you again. Is there a way that we can actually change the way the compensation model is given to you so that you actually get paid with each evaluation? So that's like a question for 2 years from now, probably, but it is really fundamental because, again, if we're taking all of the human corpus of your mind, right, and putting it into a machine, then we need a way to compensate you in perpetuity, essentially, like you would if you were to provide that service 1,000 times, rather than the machine outputting that thing 1,000 times.
I want to stay on that for a little bit and think about what it means to navigate those systems because there is a lot of need, and you're trying to do technology supported, I'm going to use, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, of why technology supported remote resettlement work. The thing I want to come back to is this idea that AI is actually a lot of things. I think for a lot of today, the initials AI have stood in for Gen AI, chatbots, ChatGPT, etc. But my opinion, do I get to have an opinion as the moderator? I clearly already do.
These are not biased questions at all.
My opinion is that the ripest area for potential impact and support is not in generative AI, but is in other pieces of automation and ML that support that massive scale work and data analysis, and building intentional closed products within organizations or agency networks, and so can you all talk a little bit, again, I will invite examples if you have them, but I also welcome your general comments about how folks think about all of the technology that's maybe available and not just get stuck in the vein of like, how should we use ChatGPT for this? Like, we're looking at this work site and we're like, how could I use this hammer? I have a hammer already in my hand and you have an entire house to build. Why would you build the whole thing with a hammer, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to I know I've talked a lot, so I don't want to take up all the time. But I think one quick thing is when it comes to technologies, like ML technologies, like computer vision, for example, a lot of it is about the diagnostic. Diagnostics are getting very good in like tumor detection, for example, which is great. But then if you're a public health person like me, you know the diagnostic is just one little part of the entire solution. In fact, it's not the solution. It's diagnosing the solution, but then you have to figure out how to actually get the solution into people's hands. I think the appeal of generative AI is it propositions a solution, and that's the appeal behind it. So you have to know whether you're using AI to automate a process, to actually diagnose something, or to generate your solution. And once you unpack that, I think you have a better sense of which technology you want to use.
And I think, again, continuing on that technology supported, right? AI is a big conversation right now. It has a lot of promise, a lot of potential, not without a lot of risk and a lot of things to be thinking about. But there's a lot of ways to meet the needs of the folks that you're trying to meet. Cars a lot as an analogy, right? We need to put on seatbelts. We don't have seatbelts in AI right now, right? That's part of the problem. Gas guzzling cars would be an issue if we hadn't put regulation in place, right? Care of the climate, right? So there's that analogy where we need to be thinking about it's a tool, it exists, how can we make sure that it's being used for good? The car driving example holds because I use my car as little as I need to, right? I live in a walking city. I love that I have that option, but when I'm going 4 hours to go visit my parents, totally taking the car. What this analogy was pointing to with on-ramps, though, was that if you are using AI as the on-ramp to access all of these services, have you just given somebody tools and ability that they might not know how to navigate, right? Do they have a GPS? Do they have all the other pieces that they need for this particular on-ramp? So if we're moving into AI, the needs are very different for that on-ramp than something more relational or analog or, technology supported, but not necessarily adding in the AI components. You are every day building on-ramps. You need to think about what is needed to make that on-ramp a smooth transition. If it's AI, you're not sending them off with a Ferrari and no GPS and no navigator, right? You need to make sure that the technology-supported solution is right fit and really meets the stakeholders' needs, which means bring them into that conversation. The other is, I know there's a lot of fear around what is this tool doing to our people, our planet, and everything else. That analogy sits with, we need regulation. So same with car culture. We needed to speak up. We needed to say what we liked, what we didn't like, how we're going to meet needs better. We need minivans, right? Remember the advent of the minivan? When I was a kid, that was a new thing, right? Sliding doors. So that's the moment, right? AI, small.
Car analogies always come up with AI.
Right?
Like every single panel I've ever been on.
I am deeply disappointed ice skating is not part of this.
No ice skating.
Work a triple axle in there.
Yeah. So I'll pause on the analogies, but if that helps you ground with the things we're grappling with right now, is the incredible speed that AI can offer. We need to make sure we're checking all those boxes. You can build your own checklist to make sure that you do. And then the regulation piece, the risk, the fear, the concerns we have, if we're not joining that conversation, it's not going to change. We'd still have giant cars on the road that we're spewing all over if we hadn't stepped up to say we need emissions control.
Yeah, and I would also say to that too, to avoid shiny object syndrome. So it's like squirrel. Every 5 minutes, there's something new that comes out. So I would say avoid.
That's a new analogy.
Yeah, that's another analogy,
But the
right?
squirrel is ice skating, so don't.
Ice skating squirrel. Yes.
That's a shiny squirrel.
Yes, ice skating squirrels, cars, and I think there was like one other one too. But yeah, avoid finding a solution in search of a problem, and I think that that's where a lot of the pitfalls lie, is that we see a thing, we think that that thing needs to be the end all and be all, but really it's definitely not. And I'm all about use cases as well too. So if you find a low hanging use case, low stakes, start there, definitely.
So I don't mean to be a downer.
It's okay.
Human rights guys here.
I'm usually the sad trombone, so I welcome a whole accompaniment here.
You know how earlier I was talking about generative solutions oriented. Well, here's a solution that I haven't solved. But if you look at AI regulation around the world, there's one very disturbing pattern. And that is all of the countries that do regulate, which is a very small number, and of the multinational organizations that do, like the EU and so on, they all exempt military. What is one of the major reasons why someone needs to flee their home? because of war. So we have talked a lot about how AI could potentially serve a vulnerable population in meaningful ways to get them resettled. That's beautiful. But let's look at how AI might be causing the very need to flee. Sorry.
I just want to be clear and clarify because I was on like a Copilot panel with the developers of Copilot for work, and because that's locked into your tenant, nothing's going outside of that. So in general, we're talking about like, you know, AI in general, right? Not the licensed versions of AI the Microsoft essentially is running.
I encourage you to read your terms.
We could go over them. It says that nothing leaves their tenant, and I have the paperwork to show it.
There's a really funny South Park episode about reading the terms if you need a giggle about what might happen if you don't read them. I'll leave it there.
But I think it's just important to remember that, to Mala's point earlier, the terms are also for that version, right? And it behooves us all to review them every update, every version change, because that's a wonderfully sneaky way
I mean, it's depending on the Copilot too, because Copilot is now, it's like the word sauce, like it's so generic. What does that mean? I was the first person at GitHub to look at GitHub Copilot for the social sector, and I kind of had to shut it down because there were so many lawsuits, there were so many unanswered questions. Like, we couldn't ask an organization like IRC to use Copilot because what if they took some proprietary data or some unlicensed data and then their entire grant got shut down for that reason, right? So we're still in early days with that. I would just always proceed, especially if you're using anything subscription or cloud-based, assume that something is going to be taken for some purpose. Even if it's, the Copilot may say very specifically, none of your code will be repurposed, but that's not necessarily covering your data or your text or even the usage pattern, like how long you stay on a certain function or the way that you click on something.
Or authorize third apps.
Yeah, the kind of data, you know, to the points made up here, it's enormous. So it could also be the behavior that you're using with the tool, not necessarily the data that you put in there.
I'm kind of lazy, so I don't read my terms. I don't. But what I'm
turning
in the
into
social,
a confessional,
right? So, but I'm in the social sector, so I run on relationships, right? And so there are people I trust, and those that I don't. The for-profit side of the equation, I generally don't trust, right? And I've gone into tete-a-tete with Salesforce. It's a platform we use. It's a great database. I don't like your values. I don't trust you, right? And so, again, back to that very simple inner compass. Like, you know who you trust. Sam Altman? Yeah, probably not, right? Like, there are certain characters that you can say, like, I don't want to trust them that far, right? I will trust them to build me a timeline. I will trust them to build me a checklist. I don't need them looking at my sensitive data and trying to, you know, keep it safe or not keep it safe. Like, I don't want it in there at all, right? So I think, again, just kind of going back to, you know, we're up here experts telling you, but you know, and you know a lot more than you think you do.
You've talked a lot about open and closed systems, but aren't we really at Pandora's, you know, the box is already open?
The toothpaste is out of the tube.
Yeah, is it really, like, what is informed consent? None of us know how AI works. Even you guys are the experts, and I'm sure you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So none of us are informed to give consent. And I don't know. I love tech. I love using it. It makes my life easier. But at the same time, I think we're past open and closed, because once something is breached, they can just send crawlers and scrapers out there to scrape it off of whoever's, you know, offering it up for sale.
I think that brings up a great point, because AI runs on data. What data are we collecting? What data are we keeping? Right? Because even if it's not in AI, if it's in your system, you could be subpoenaed. So I think it's even more foundational than that. Like, remove AI from the conversation and think really carefully about, what do you need in your files? What kind of data do you need to be collecting? Does it need to be associated with an individual, or can you even anonymize that in your system so it doesn't become problematic? So I think, fantastic point. In-house, you are a little bit safer. Your filing cabinet, you're a little bit safer. As soon as it goes out there, you're less safe. So I think there are layers and there are ways to be thinking about this and still get in there and play. There's nothing wrong with it brainstorming with you, role playing with you. Like you're not putting much in there to get a little bit of help.
I mean, I think it's also the ease of access and how you present the data, right? So there's a difference between me being like, this is where I live, this is my age, this is my social security number, and being shocked when somebody steals my identity.
This is my mother's maiden name.
Versus having some modicum of privacy or responsibility and then being shocked by my identity. You know, the devil is in the details with this data, right? Like whether it's unstructured or structured, and what format is it in? Is it machine readable? Is it behind some kind of encryption keys? All that stuff I can't tell you, but I can assume that there's some kind of protections around that data. So even if something is breached, it's not the same thing as me being like, hey, ChatGPT, here's my social security number. Could you open a credit card for me? Like, that's one part of it, right? And then the other part of it, and for those of you who have worked with data in sensitive situations, I'm sure you realize this, you can present unstructured data to a system or to a person, a very good data scientist. They may figure out an advanced way to triage that or manipulate that or put some kind of like control over that and then derive patterns or figure out who the most vulnerable populations are with that data. But it's very different than you presenting the conclusion to them, and they don't even have to do the work. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's as straightforward as saying whether the data is open or closed. I think it's the way that we present it and also the cautions that we take personally with it.
And just a reminder that for almost every technology, probably every technology, the greatest security vulnerability is the humans using it, not the actual tech. So for a system to be closed or open, well, when Mala's over here typing in her social security number, it doesn't matter, right? Like,
yeah, and
we are the problem.
We're not working on our own. There are companies out there that are making sure, even if my data is stolen, that it's not going to go and open a credit card in my name, right? There are guardrails on both sides, especially when you work with financial services in the States. Like, that's a highly regulated industry. So it's not the same thing as just like presenting the data and being like, well, oh, whatever. You know, it's really hard. It's a foregone conclusion. So I don't think these questions are as straightforward. Again, it's like open versus closed. It's also the ease of access and the system you're using, the industry you work with, and definitely the government. I'm saying proceed with caution regardless. Start with the policy in your organization, but also don't be dumb. Like, just don't be dumb.
And also as a futurist, one of the ways I think about like the don't be dumb, like what does that look like? We have sexual harassment trainings now that we have to take in New York State every year. You have to get refreshed. That's the upskilling of the human so we don't make a mistake. At the other end of that, there's financial audits, right? That's the control of the tax person making sure that we've paid what we're supposed to pay, right? That the story makes sense. So those are two areas that I point to when we think about what might happen with AI, right? At some point, we might have data audits that we have to respond to the same way we do financial audits. At some point, we might have the equivalent of AI trainings regularly for your staff so that they don't mess up and put the wrong data in. Right? So, you know, thinking about what already exists in the world, what examples can we follow? David, please.
Yeah, I think just by the nature of the work that I do, which is a little more broad than just resettlement specifically, we're always thinking about the individualized data protections and, you know, if we can't protect it, don't collect it, et cetera, right? Just general sound like cybersecurity like practices from a resettlement standpoint, and just kind of like thinking as so many people have contributed to conversation today. One of the things that is concerning to me that I'm going to pose as a question is around labor, and not labor necessarily in terms of placing resettled individuals with work, but actually like us in the room ourselves, and how AI, at least with the incentives from like the few big companies that, you know, generate these models that we utilize, how it could potentially become a choke for like our own like bureaucratic like movement and surveillance. Does it actually in the future create less autonomy for us to make human decisions about individuals, instead of like constraining us along the lines of like the output or whatever? And so thinking about it from that context, like how do we efficiently like look at a future with AI in this space, not just for the individuals who we're like putting ourselves on the line to help, but also with our own like judgment as human beings who have a huge wealth of knowledge and of experience that we carry with us that may or may not be valuable to whatever model or output and whatever kind of solution they want us to go towards.
Yeah, so I was just thinking along that line too, and I was thinking, what do we give up in exchange for efficiency? So I think it's about each individual knowing where that line is and where that balance is. So knowing that my experience and my knowledge and the things that I bring may not be something that the LLM can match, then I would know, okay, well, I'm not going to make a decision about this person or this process using this tool only, and I'm not giving up my autonomy and my agency to that. So I think it's about like teaching people where that line is, and that's kind of where I stand on it, because yeah, sometimes I'm thinking too as I work, is this making me less smart? Is this, am I not intentionally misspelling something knowing that the AI is just going to catch it? So I think it's just up to all of us to know where that line is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the data paradox, like 17, 18 years ago, when I started my career at the UN in an internship, it was a pain to download a CSV file in Senegal. I can't even tell you. It was like 12 kilobytes, and I was like waiting all day with a crappy internet. Wow. If you've ever worked in sub-Saharan Africa, you know what I'm saying. This is way before cloud computing, right? So everything was sent over some kind of HTTP protocol. Then cloud computing came along and everything became cheaper. And so the question became less of, can we store it and is it possible to send it to our colleagues, and more of like, oh, we should collect everything because now finally we're at a place where it's super cheap. And that was like the biggest barrier to data collection. It was the cheapness and the fastness. And there was a strong argument to collect a lot of data because we had a lot of issues, like at the UN where we would do this report. It would be an assessment, like some kind of survey that UNICEF would do across 50 villages to get a representative sample, and for the life of us, we couldn't get a double disaggregation. I could not tell you if this person who's a woman of this tribe was more likely to be in line for violence than somebody who was of a higher socioeconomic class. I could just not do that because the data wasn't there. So there was a real justification for a long time to collect a lot of data, because that's how we found out a lot of trends with LGBTQ rights around the world. We started collecting that data. Now it's come to the side where, okay, cybersecurity and privacy concerns are so large that we don't want to have that data because it is a security concern. So if you can't protect it, don't collect it. But then we get back into this issue where, well, my LLM's super racist. Why do you think that is? It doesn't have the data. It just doesn't have the data. So when we talk about evaluations and making that LLM better, we are giving the model more data. So there is a paradox in what we collect and why we collect it and how to improve things. And it's, again, not a straightforward question of like, oh, well, we can't collect the data because it's not safe. Well, then you're going to get something that is Western norms, probably for rich white people in America. And then you have to figure out how to apply that to the rest of the world. So in some cases, we actually do need to collect more data.
I think too, just one thing, I guess my fear is more on the policy end of like from an organizational level. We talk about, we're talking a lot about like personal responsibility, like moral compass, individually trusting your bones, that you have in your experience to make decisions. But what if that is in direct like retaliation or against a policy that's now like ingratiated within an organization, and you have to go down the route of using this technology or this model.
And time to update your policy.
Yeah, and I was like, the problem is also the algorithms, right? Like, we don't want to get too into the black box, but there was somebody in New York who actually was in a class here at the Civic Hall, and he was here to learn about AI. He's like, I work in a nonprofit that gives mortgages to folks who otherwise wouldn't qualify for mortgages. There's all these great AI tools out there for fintech folks. I can't use any of them, right? The algorithm would have done the equivalent of like redlining the population that he was trying to get loans to. So all of these really fancy for-profit tools that were helping, process mortgages, he couldn't use them because, exactly to your point, like, it's going to eliminate the people that he's trying to support. And so that's where the problem's in the algorithm. And that's why we need to be participating in those conversations. We need to be building tools that work for our purposes and not just for-profit purposes. And so, yes, I think there are different layers of how we can step in and make sure that we're not getting those. But yeah, Mala.
We're going to let one more person ask a question, and then we are going to work together to answer it very succinctly.
I work predominantly with youth, and we know now that they are using it from elementary, middle, and upwards. But what can you advice that you give to youth that are using AI, knowing that we can't, the Pandora box has been opened. There is no way we can take that back. But how can they use it without hindering their independent thoughts and critical thinking, so that over-reliant on AI?
One thing we're focusing a lot on in humane intelligence is helping anybody, youth or otherwise, but I think it's really important for youth because obviously their neural synapses are literally forming as they use these tools, is to figure out what is a bad AI system versus a bad decision from an AI system versus bad behavior with the AI system. So that's one thing I would focus on, because you can't just take the response that you get from a generative AI tool and take it at face value. You have to investigate, is it a bad decision, bad system, or did I do something quote unquote wrong or bad with the system?
And there is, Carnegie and Microsoft already published proof through their research that regular use of the tools very quickly leads to reliance and distrust in your own decision making. Because again, the tools are designed to tell you information as if it is both factual and exactly what you wanted, way faster than you came to that conclusion, right? And so to the same piece, children are still learning, and that gray mush is becoming a brain, right? So focusing on this can assist you. Its job is to serve you. You are not serving this tool, right? You are making decisions. You maybe got some information here or a prompt or an idea, but like you have to hold the decision making.
And I think that gets hard with youth because we talk about, zone of genius, right? I encourage all of you to stay close to your zone of genius because that's where you're going to be certain that there's no hallucinations or, errors in the thinking. You're going to be much more able to fact check that. So I think when it comes to children's usage of it, I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I try to help them understand not often do we want to other, but this is a time where I do other. I say it, right? Go talk to it, or you're talking to a robot right now, like helping the children understand that this is a different type of thing you're engaging with. But there is robust evidence about what happened with the social media moment of the last 20 years and what we did not do for our children. And so if we have not thought about that critically, I invite all of you to be thinking about how is this impacting youth, and collect your data and feed it back out. Because right now, y'all are the experts. Hi, nice to meet you all. We're the ones driving this conversation. So please stay engaged, connected, and bring your zone of genius to these conversations.
Huge round of applause for the panel.
Thank you.